We can't just sit here. Get back here! You're slipping, Rick. We've all seen it. We understand why, but now is not the time. You once said this isn't a democracy. Now you have to own up to that. I put my family's life in your hands. So get your head clear and do something.
Listen, I don't take chances anymore. And you shouldn't.
What's going on, Walking Dead family, my fellow Rashoners and shippers alike? It's your girl Lynn here with the second installment of The Rise of Savage Rick. Before we get started, do me a favor and smash those like and subscribe buttons and hit the notification bell so you will be alerted whenever I drop new content. I also want to send a special shout out to everyone who has subscribed, commented, and liked my videos. Thank you so much for helping the channel grow. It's much appreciated. Now that we have the housekeeping out of the way, let's jump into the subject of this video. Season 3, Episode 1, Seed, picks up with Rick and his group taking shelter in a long-abandoned home. And from the looks of them, it's been a hard winter. After clearing the home, everyone is sitting down with the exception of Rick, who is posted at the window remaining vigilant of the surroundings. His focus is only broken when he turns and notices Carl, who has found 2 cans of dog food and is trying to open one of them. Without a word, Rick takes one of the cans, looks at it, and tosses it away. The look in Rick's eyes is still the same as when we last saw him in Season 2, Episode 13, beside the dying fire. It's a look of anger, determination, and a hint of rage. In this moment, he sees that this is what it's come to. His son being so hungry that he's trying to eat dog food. And it's a testament to the harsh life that they've been living on the road since they left the farm. Rick doesn't even have a moment to fully process what he's feeling because the home was about to be overrun by walkers. And we kind of get a clue as to what's been happening to them all winter because they haven't been able to settle anywhere. Later on the road, after a conversation on what their next destination will be, Rick and Daryl decide to go on a hunt. And they come across a prison. Rick had just been talking to Herschel about needing to find a place for Lori because she was about to have that baby any day. So it was really important that he found a place for all of them immediately. So when he sees this prison, I mean, we see a look in his eyes that we haven't seen since he found Lori and Carl. It's a look of hope. So Rick and Daryl bring the rest of the group to the prison and he immediately starts handing out assignments and tells them they're going to clear the field and rest there for the night. His plan works, and while everyone is sitting around the campfire, eating, talking, singing Kumbaya, Rick, ever vigilant, is walking the perimeter of the fence, making sure that there were no weaknesses. He eventually goes to join the group and lays out the plan for the next day. They were going to clear the courtyard and then a building, and tells them, you know, this place could be a gold mine. I mean, food, medicine, possibly an armory nearby. Being faced with the reality that they were not in the clear, it seemed to kind of bring down the levity that the group were enjoying. But Rick knew he had to keep them grounded, and after telling them that he would keep watch, he walks away and is quickly followed by Lori. Rick at this point is still holding his peace, and Lori has no idea that the third step in Rick's transformation has started. I mean, the stove is hot and the water is about to come to a boil. Lori goes after Rick to ask him if they could just take the night or take a couple of days just to rest because everyone is so exhausted, and he tells her flat out, it's no time for a party, the baby's going to be here soon, we need to get this done. She kind of ticks him off even further, saying that they need to get the house in order, and tries to talk to him about their situation. And he tells her, look, you want to talk, you talk to Herschel. The next day, Rick, Maggie, Glenn, Daryl, and T-Dog clear the courtyard and the C-Block building. And afterwards, the rest of the group start moving their things in. The first thing that Lori says to Rick is, it's secure, like she's questioning. Again, this woman cannot stop doubting her husband. And, you know, Rick's reaction isn't the same as it was in the past or even the night before. He doesn't really, react angrily. He just answers her yes. And she, for the first time that I can remember in the series since her appearance, gives him a genuine and sincere thank you. He doesn't answer her, he just, walks away. And she tells Herschel later that Rick hates her and he's just too good a man to say it. And she starts confessing her sins to him like he's a priest. And Herschel tells her, you know who doesn't give a shit about this? The baby. This also puts into perspective why Rick has been so cold, or part of the reason why he's been so cold to her. Everyone knows or believes that baby she is carrying is Shane's, and Daryl even jokes about this to Carol the night before. Daryl goes so far as to call the baby Lil Shane, and Carol tells him, don't be mean. Lori has humiliated him in front of everyone. In front of people that he has come to know and love like family. And it's one thing to know that your wife has wronged you, but for everyone else to know as well, it's entirely too much for anyone. Later in the episode, Rick takes a group consisting of the same people with the addition of Herschel to search the prison for the cafeteria and the infirmary. During their journey, they run into a group of walkers, and as everyone is backtracking, trying to get away, Glenn and Maggie are separated. And when Herschel goes to look for them, he gets himself bit by a walker he thought was, dormant or dead, laying against the wall. The group find him, they pick him up, and they stumble across the cafeteria that they had been looking for, and they close themselves in. And we see this look on Rick's face. This is another new look. We're getting a lot of looks from Rick in this one episode. So, his mind is going 1,000 miles a minute, you can tell. Herschel, this man is like his new Dell, his Yoda, if you will. And he's about to die. And the only thing that Rick can think to do is cut off the offender. And he looks at Herschel, he goes, "This is the way. This is the only way you survive." And until Daryl brings it to their attention, they don't even realize that they're being watched by a group of prisoners from behind a kitchen window. And, once Rick notices them, he barely acknowledges them and just tells the rest of his group, we got to get him back to the cell block. They get him back. Carol immediately, starts looking at the area, and she tells them, we can't cauterize this because it could send him into shock. He'll die anyway. And the group starts to hear a commotion in the next room, and Rick tells them, it's prisoners, survivors that we found. I'll deal with it. And he's basically just trying to keep them calm. So Rick goes out, and he and Daryl proceed to explain to them, what's been going on for the last 10 months that they've been locked in this cafeteria. And Rick immediately zones in on this guy, Tomas. Tomas, from the looks of him, we can all see he is bad news. He is not someone to take lightly. That look, that crazy look, is back in Rick's eye. He knows, I'm going to have to kill this guy. And Rick has a code, and he has to follow that code. He has to give people a chance. It's just something else that's engraved in his DNA. He can't leave anyone behind, and he has to give people a chance. Rick tells them, we'll help you clear out another building that you can live in exchange for half the food in the cafeteria. Tomas, he reluctantly agrees, but he's used to being the top dog. He doesn't like being told what to do, and he makes that very obvious. And he proceeds to call Rick, Robin Hood, calls him a pussy, he calls him some other names. And, Rick still, he doesn't outwardly react, but that look is still in his eyes. And Tomas has a look in his eyes. One of them has got to go, and they both know it. Later on, they make their way to D Block. But before they had left, Lori took Rick aside and told him, I know there's no malice in your heart. And you do what you have to do to keep this group safe. Rick was going to do that anyway, but I think this was a moment that Lori, or one of the few times that we see her when she's interacting with Rick, she's being, I want to say a good wife, but she's giving him good advice. And she's right. He doesn't have malice in his heart. He's not a cold-blooded killer, but if he has to do it, don't do it with any regret. And it's with this in mind that, Rick goes along with the prisoners, Daryl and T-Dog, and they proceed to cell block D. On their way there, Big Tiny gets scratched very deeply by a walker because he didn't listen to Rick and Daryl's instructions. While, Rick is explaining to Andrew, another prisoner who Rick knows is a problem, that, they can't do anything. That scratch is deep. Look where it is. What does he expect Rick to do? Cut the guy's whole back off? It's not possible.
And there has to be something we can do. Maybe we just lock him up.
Quarantine him. We gotta do something. Why you just standing there? We gotta save him.
There's nothing we can do.
You son of a bitch.
It's not going to save the guy's life. And while he's explaining this to Andrew, Andrew is giving him the look that Shane has given him, a look that Lori has given him, a look that Carol has given him. And, it's just one thing after another, one person too many, blaming him for something that he really cannot control. And while he's still talking to Andrew, Tomas jumps the gun and just bludgeons Big Tiny to death. And by the time he's done, Tomas is covered in blood and he's staring at Rick and Rick is staring at him. It's like he's seeing Shane 2.0. And that cements it. He's going to have to kill Tomas, and he just needs to wait for the time, the opportunity, and the reason to do it.
You see the look on his face?
He makes one move.
Just give me a signal.
Lucky for Rick, he didn't have to wait long. While trying to kill walkers coming out of a door leading to the next cell block, Tomas takes a swing at Rick, and when that fails, he throws a walker at him. Daryl kills it and throws it off of him, and after the last walker is down, Rick stands face to face, once again, with yet another man who just tried to kill him. And he echoes Tomas's words from earlier, shit happens. And without warning, he swings his machete down on Tomas's head. Andrew tries to attack him, but Rick disarms him and Andrew takes off running. Now, Rick doesn't know it yet, but he's about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his life. As he chases Andrew through the catacombs of the prison, Andrew runs out into a courtyard filled with walkers. And when he turns around to, running back inside the building, Rick has already beaten him to the door and closed it. And he's staring at Andrew, and Andrew is begging and pleading with Rick to let him in. And had this been the Rick of old, he probably would have had mercy and let him in, held him at machete point and gave him maybe a second chance. But he and Tomas found the right guy at the wrong point in Rick's life.
You better run.
After he shuts the secondary door and he hears Andrew screaming from outside, it's like he's wondering, did I just make the right decision? Should I have, not necessarily that he should have let him in, but should I have just killed him myself? But he figures, the walkers are taking care of it from the sound of it. He shakes his head to himself and he walks off, happy with the resolution. Rick would later have to come to grips with the fact that this choice to not end Andrew for good when he had the chance would directly lead to the deaths of Lori and T-Dog and the temporary disappearance of Carol. In episode 4, Killer Within, Andrew comes back with a vengeance, leading walkers into the prison and setting off the alarms to call more walkers from the woods. T-Dog is subsequently bitten and dies, leading Carol to safety. Lori goes into labor, and when it's clear that she can't have a vaginal birth, she tells Maggie to take the baby and gives a heartfelt goodbye to her son.
Oh, sweet boy. The best thing I ever did. I love you.
While this is going on, Rick, Oscar, and Daryl have made it to the utility room so they can turn off the alarms and stop the walkers from coming to the prison. Andrew comes out of nowhere and attacks Rick, and a fight ensues. Rick drops his gun and it's picked up by Oscar. Andrew tells Oscar, kill him, we can take this prison back. And Rick looks, like I should have just killed them all. But to his surprise, Oscar kills Andrew and gives him back his gun. Once Rick turns off the alarms, the group goes running back to the catacombs of the prison. They come upon T-Dog's remains and they also find Carol's shawl. Rick, you could tell he can't even process what he's seeing right now. All he knows is that he needs to find Lori, Carl, and Maggie, and that's what he's going to be focusing on now because it's too late for T-Dog and Carol. They run back to the courtyard. Beth and Herschel say they never came out, so Rick is gearing up to go back into the prison when he hears a baby crying.
Oh, no.
In the aftermath, we see Rick sitting on his knees in a trance. Daryl is trying to snap him out of it, but he just looks right through Daryl. It's like he can't even see him. The only thing that breaks him out of this trance for a moment is this axe over to the left of him, which he eventually grabs and runs back inside with Maggie calling after him. But again, whether he heard her or not, you can't even say. Once back in the prison, he starts exorcising some demons. He is murking every walker he comes across. Later on, when Glenn comes to find him, he's still in this trance. Even though he's moving around, he is in this trance, and it's really hard to know what he's thinking because it's like he's seeing right through people. He's not seeing what's actually there. And when Glenn tries to get him to come back to the group, Rick doesn't even answer him. He just stares again right through him like he stared through Daryl, and he ends up jacking the kid up against the wall and then throwing him away like a rag doll. At this point, Glenn realizes, you have to leave Rick to his devices right now because he's going through something and he has to go through it. Rick ends up finding the place where Lori died, and he sees remnants of her clothing and also some blood and guts on the ground, including drag marks that lead him to the walker who, finished her off. So Rick ends that walker, and he does something that's kind of morbid. He takes out his knife, and he at first looks like he's going to do exactly what Maggie did, like a cesarean cut, but he just ends up just stabbing the walker over and over until, he just can't stab anymore. And we next see him sitting against a steam drain, just staring on at the walker, and he's hearing baby cries in his head. Rick seems to be going through the 5 stages of grief very rapidly. We had the denial outside in the courtyard with him saying, no, no, no. He's sitting in a trance, and before that, rolling around crying. Then he's angry killing walkers. Now he's just sitting and staring into oblivion, probably remembering the last conversation he had with her, which is what I call an apocalyptic divorce.
For the record, I don't think you're a bad mother.
Life is a different story. I thought maybe you were coming out here to talk about us. Maybe there's nothing to talk about anymore.
We're awful grateful for what you did.
And, just when you think, nothing else crazy can happen to him, he hears her phone ring. In the following episode, we get to delve into Rick's psyche a little bit, and everything that he's been holding in, all of the loss, all of the pain, all of the anguish is coming out in this one episode during these phone calls that he's taking from these people that he think have a camp, and he's told that they're somewhere safe. While he's asking for shelter for his group, they ask him, what happened to your wife? But he doesn't want to talk about that. That's not something he wants to face and deal with at this moment. In his mind, he still has people that he needs to take care of, and that's what he has to deal with right now. Even in his madness, he is still thinking of others, and it just shows that this crown that's on his head is weighing on him, and he feels so responsible for all of these bad things that have happened. And on the last call, he finds out that he's been talking to the ghosts of Amy, Jim, Jackie, and Lori, like people that they have lost. And some of those deaths, he's been directly blamed for so far, especially when it comes to Amy, because remember, he left the group to go back for Merle, and by the time they got back, the camp was under attack, and Amy is one of the many people who died that night. So he has all of this going on in his mind. Carol and Herschel nearly died, and he's thinking about all of these things, mainly Lori, and he's probably thinking about, how cold he was and how, not necessarily mean, but how firm he was in keeping his distance from her. I think we've all been there maybe at times where we've had issues with someone, and then that person dies, and then you start thinking about all these things that maybe you could have done differently and made it better, but it's too late.
Oh, I made a deal with myself. I would keep you alive. I'd find a place, I would fix that, and then I could I was gonna keep you alive. Carl, baby. And then I thought there'd be time. There's never time.
I believe this was the catalyst of his breakdown. Time. He thought he had more time. And that's something that we all think at some point in life. We have time. But the reality is, you never know how much time you have on this earth or how much time you have with a person. He says that he could not open that door. And it wasn't just because he was angry with Lori. It was to protect himself. And it brings to mind what Michonne said in episode 4 of The Ones Who Live. We love on each other as hard as we can while we can. As the conversation comes to an end, we hear Lori asking Rick to promise her that he will look after Carl and the baby. Rick doesn't answer. He simply just hangs up the phone. He heads back to C Block, where for the first time, he holds the baby. At this juncture, we haven't seen Rick genuinely smile in a long time. And as he looks down at this baby, who is his daughter, we see renewed hope in his eyes. But it won't last. Rick is in the eye of the storm, and he has no idea that he's about to meet the woman who would not only change his life forever, but would lead him to the man who would drop the ingredients in the pot. The governor.